What if your family didn't just leave you land, but a sealed underground secret buried for generations? In the middle of an economic collapse, one man uncovers a legacy so powerful, it could either save his future or unleash something no one was meant to find. This isn't just a story about surviving a recession. It's about trauma, wealth, and a buried gate that reacts to pain itself. Stay with us. The truth beneath the soil will shake everything you believe about success, money, and the past you tried to escape. Dean sat on the floor of his childhood home, where every wall echoed with broken promises and unpaid bills. The air always smelled like damp wood and cold desperation. His mother wept behind the closed bathroom door, her tears muffled by running water. His father had disappeared again, leaving nothing but silence and an empty dinner table. But in that pain, something awakened. A question haunted him. Is this the life I'm meant to live? At night, while others slept, Dean stared at the cracked ceiling, fists clenched, whispering to himself, "I will never let this be my future." His school labeled him slow, dyslexic, a boy who would never amount to anything. But he saw things they didn't. He saw his mother breaking under bills. He saw hunger not just in the stomach, but in the soul. One day, while digging through garbage behind a diner for leftover food, he found a half-torn magazine with a quote printed across the page. "You don't rise when you're ready. You rise when the pain leaves you no other choice." Dean folded that page, put it in his pocket, and made a vow. But he didn't know that the fire inside him would soon meet a storm from the outside world. The economy was shifting. People were panicking. And for someone like Dean, who had nothing, it was the perfect time to risk everything. As the world braced for a financial storm, Dean took his first step into a future that no one believed in. But something or someone was watching, quietly testing how far he was willing to go. The streets buzzed with rumors. Banks collapsing, businesses closing, people losing everything. It was the beginning of a recession, and most people clung tighter to whatever they had left. But Dean saw something different. He stood outside a real estate office, watching professionals lock their doors early, afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Behind the glass, a red sign read, "Closed due to market uncertainty." Dean smirked. "This is where they stop. And this is where I begin," he whispered. Without money, without connections, Dean knocked on every door in town, offering to work for free. Most laughed. Some slammed doors. But one older man, Mr. Rafe, didn't. "You've got eyes like a fighter," Mr. Rafe said. But this world eats fighters unless they learn where to punch. Dean became his unpaid apprentice, delivering contracts, cleaning floors, listening to phone calls. He watched, learned, and copied everything. He saw how fear made people freeze, and how opportunity always dressed in disaster. Late one night, as they closed a deal that most experts had already given up on, Mr. Rafe leaned back and said, "You know what makes people wealthy during a crash? They don't wait for the rain to stop. They dance in it." That night, Dean didn't sleep. He walked through the empty streets, repeating the words in his head. The world was scared. That meant the window was open, for those bold enough to jump. But as Dean rushed forward, blindly driven by ambition, he failed to notice what was building behind him. A shadow from his past was waking, and it remembered every broken promise Dean had made to escape it. Dean's rise was fast. Too fast. He was now flipping properties, partnering on small deals, and making more money in a month than his entire family had seen in a year. The rush was intoxicating. Each win pushed him harder. Each risk felt like destiny proving him right. But behind every success was a cost he refused to count. He hadn't seen his mother in weeks. His sister's calls went unanswered. Old friends said he had changed. Dean told himself it was part of the process, part of the price of escaping poverty. But something inside him was starting to ache. One evening, he walked into a half-renovated apartment, now his third project. The contractor handed him a bill that was double what they agreed on. "You either pay it or I walk," the man said coldly. "Too many people quitting in this market. You're lucky I'm still here." Dean gritted his teeth. "Fine," he said. "But this is the last time I let someone else control my path." That night, Dean returned to his empty rental house. No furniture, just a mattress and the same magazine clipping from years ago taped to the wall. He looked at himself in the mirror. He had the money, he had the projects, but the pain was still there. Not the pain of being poor, this was different. This was the pain of running without resting, building without healing, winning without feeling. He took out a notebook and scribbled a line. "What if I make it, but I don't make it whole?" Just as he closed the book, a message popped up on his old phone. It was a name he hadn't seen in years. His father. One word. Call. Dean stared at it, heart pounding. The shadow from his past had just knocked. Dean paced across the cold floor, the word call glowing on his screen. He hadn't spoken to his father since the night he left them. Broke, bitter and blaming the world. That man was a wound Dean had sealed long ago. Or so he thought. He deleted the message. But it stayed in his mind like a whisper behind the walls. To distract himself, Dean buried deeper into work. He launched a new course teaching people how to survive financially during the recession. He held free seminars. He even gave away templates for building online offers. The feedback was electric. "You saved my business. I paid off my debt because of your system." But even as people cheered him on, Dean felt an emptiness inside. One night after an event, a woman approached him. Her name was Clara. Mid-30s, exhausted eyes, but a fire in her voice. "You said you were dyslexic and still built everything," she said. "How?" "Because I'm drowning and I'm tired of pretending I'm okay." Dean paused. For the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. He looked at her and simply said, "Pain can be rocket fuel. But if you never land, it'll tear your ship apart." Clara nodded slowly. "So what made you land?" Dean froze. Nothing had made him land. He had been holding down the nitrous button, full throttle, since the day he ran from that broken house. Later that night, he reopened the old notebook. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "You can't build a future if you're still at war with the past." But the war wasn't over, because the past had just sent another message. This time, not from his father, but from the lawyer handling his estate. His father was dead, and he left behind something Dean never expected. Dean stared at the lawyer's message, unable to move. His father gone. The man who vanished without warning. The man Dean swore he'd never become. Attached was a scanned letter, written in trembling handwriting. "Dean, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I left you something. 20 acres of land in the town where you were born. I never did anything right. Maybe this is a start. You always had the fire. I just didn't know how to hold it. Your old man." Dean printed the letter and held it in his hands like it might disappear. The words dug deep. Regret. Oh, maybe love. Maybe something else. A week later he stood on that land. Wild grass swayed in the wind. A broken gate leaned sideways. The house was gone, burned down years ago, but the soil remembered everything. Dean walked the property slowly, past where the kitchen had once stood, past the tree with the rope swing he made from torn bicycle tires. Every step stirred something inside him. He didn't cry, but something inside cracked. In that moment, he realized he'd spent his entire life trying to escape this land, this name, this legacy. But maybe he hadn't escaped it. Maybe he had only been running in circles. Suddenly his phone rang. It was Clara. "I just sold my first online course," she said. "You were right. It works. I just needed a reason." Dean smiled faintly. "What was your reason?" "My daughter," she said. "She deserves better." Dean looked out across the land. Maybe that was the difference now. He wasn't building just for survival anymore. He was building for legacy. But what he didn't know was that someone else wanted that land. And they would do anything to take it. The offer came in the form of a glossy envelope, hand-delivered. A real estate development firm wanted to buy the land. Fast, in full cash. No inspection. No negotiation. The number was high. Higher than anything Dean had ever seen for a patch of soil that held nothing but weeds and memories. But the moment he opened it, something felt wrong. The letter wasn't addressed to Dean Graziosi. It was addressed to current holder of parcel 114B. Transfer pending. Dean called the lawyer. That land's value just went up overnight, the lawyer said cautiously. Someone filed a zoning request to build a tech warehouse complex. But here's the thing, they filed it months ago. Before your father died. Dean's chest tightened. His father had known. Maybe he'd been offered the deal. Maybe he had refused it. Maybe leaving the land to Dean was his final act of defiance. The next day, Dean returned to the property. This time there were flags in the ground, markers, survey tape, and a man in a black suit, standing near the old tree. "I work with Helix Urban Group," the man said calmly. "We've been waiting a long time. The offer on the table won't stay forever." Dean narrowed his eyes. "Why do you want it so badly?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because it's not just land. It's leverage." That night, Dean sat in his truck on the edge of the property, the air thick with silence. He pulled out his notebook and wrote 4 words. This land holds legacy. He could take the money and be done with it. Build more companies. Help more people. But something told him, this wasn't about money anymore. Something ancient was rooted in this ground. Something unfinished. And whatever it was, Helix Urban Group wanted it buried. Days turned into restless nights as Dean dug deeper into the history of parcel 114B. The further he searched, the more strange details surfaced. Old town records showed the land had once belonged to a man named Elias Graziosi, Dean's grandfather. But according to county files, the land was transferred illegally in 1972 to a shell company. Somehow, it had ended up back in his father's name, just before his death. The paperwork was tangled. The ownership trail, deliberately obscured. Why? Dean drove to the town archives, a small brick building with dust-covered shelves and forgotten microfilm reels. An old clerk handed him a weathered manila file labeled, Graziosi Estate, Restricted. Inside he found newspaper clippings, coded letters, and a photograph. A young man in military gear. His grandfather, standing beside a scientist in front of a small wooden shack on his land. In the photo's corner a handwritten note. Project Kismet, disbanded 1959. Dean's heart pounded. He had never heard of Kismet. But he knew enough to recognize a cover-up when he saw one. He returned to the land under heavy clouds. His boots crushed dry leaves as he followed the flags Helix had left behind. Something pulled him to the far edge, near the tree line. There, buried under moss and branches, was a rusted metal hatch, bolted shut. Dean knelt down, brushing away the dirt. It wasn't just a hatch. It was a door. And his family had spent generations keeping it hidden. But now the world wanted it open. Dean returned the next morning with bolt cutters and a flashlight. The sky hung low and gray, as if the land itself held its breath. He knelt at the hatch, heart racing, fingers trembling. Blick. The lock snapped open, rust flaking into the soil. Dean gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch creaked, resisting, as though it hadn't been touched in decades. A foul, earthy smell rushed out. Wet metal, old air, and something else. Something ancient. Stairs led downward. Concrete steps, narrow and steep. He descended slowly, light trembling in his hand. The air grew colder. The walls were lined with old panels, peeling labels, and symbols he didn't recognize. Some were scratched out. Others were sealed behind thick glass. At the bottom a metal door waited. Etched into its surface was a symbol, a ring encircling a jagged lightning bolt, faintly similar to the one in the photo from the archive. Dean hesitated. Then he pushed it open. Inside was a small chamber. tables with crumbling documents, reels of old film, blueprints, and one thing that didn't belong, an old recorder still blinking with a dim red light. He pressed play. A voice crackled through the speaker. "Will, confident, tired. If you're hearing this, Project Kismet failed to stay buried. The energy beneath this land. It reacts to pain, to memory. We never meant to create a gate. We only wanted power. But something came through. And it never left." Dean stumbled back. A gate. Suddenly his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Do not go any further. You're not supposed to find this." His fingers went numb. He wasn't alone anymore. And whatever had been buried beneath his family's name for generations was now awake. Dean raced up the stairs, lungs burning. The hatch slammed shut behind him with a metallic thud. He looked around. Nothing. Only the wind through the trees, the rustle of branches, and his own heartbeat pounding like war drums in his ears. He drove straight to the county library. He needed answers about Project Kismet, about the energy, about what his grandfather had done. In a forgotten wing of the building, he found a restricted military ledger, half redacted, stamped, declassified 2004. Inside, a single paragraph leapt out. Subject 114B contains high-frequency geodynamic pulses reactive to emotional trauma. All tests ceased after Phase 3 breach. Containment now classified under civil asset domain. Dean stared at the words. Trauma. Energy. Breach. It wasn't just land. It was alive, feeding on generational pain. And his family. They weren't just owners. They were gatekeepers. His phone buzzed again. A new message. "You opened it. Now we're both marked." Dean's breath caught. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a statement of fact. He returned to the property that night, but something had changed. Lights in the distance. Helix Urban Group had returned. Black trucks, flashing lights, men in dark coats unloading equipment near the hatch. Dean crouched behind the tree line. One of them walked toward the tree with the old rope swing. His swing. The man raised a strange device. Beeped, then stopped. He knelt and placed his hand on the soil. And the earth trembled. Dean felt it in his chest. A deep hum, like the low growl of a sleeping giant. Suddenly, the man looked up, directly at where Dean was hiding. Their eyes met. And Dean knew. They weren't just here to buy the land. They had come to activate it. Dean didn't run. He stepped out from the trees, heart hammering like a war drum, the notebook clenched in his fist. The man from Helix stared at him, unfazed, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the man said calmly. "But we do. And we've waited decades." Dean walked slowly toward him. "Then why didn't my father sell it? Why didn't my grandfather bury it deeper?" The man gave a faint smile. "Because they were chosen. But unlike them, you're interfering." Behind him, the others had opened the hatch. Blue lights pulsed from within. Silent, rhythmic, like a heart about to restart after years of silence. Dean stepped closer to the edge. "This isn't just land. It's memory. It holds everything we tried to forget. Everything we ran from. And pain is power," the man said. "Unrefined, raw, infinite. We're not here to destroy. We're here to harness." Dean looked down into the glowing pit. His mind raced through everything. His father's letter, the broken childhood, the relentless hunger, the door underground. His legacy had never been wealth. It was protection, resistance, silence in a world that wanted to turn memory into fuel. "Then take me instead," Dean said. "Leave the land." The man blinked, startled. "What? You want the trauma? I've carried it all my life. You want energy? Try facing the shame I built empires to cover. You want power?" Dean shouted. "Then take me." The earth roared beneath them. The hatch pulsed brighter. Lights flickered. The machines began to fail, sparking, overheating. Suddenly the hum stopped. The land fell still. Every device shut down. The man from Helix looked around in disbelief. What did you do? Dean stepped back. I accepted it. From the trees, Clara appeared, holding her daughter's hand. Behind her, townspeople began to arrive. Silent, curious. Some held candles. Dean turned to them and raised his voice. This land doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to those who rise from it. And then, just as dawn broke, the soil under Dean's feet glowed once more. Not with danger but with peace. The gate had closed. But the legacy had only just begun.